Welcome to the Culture Hour. My name is Thomas Rain Crowe, and we're here this morning to interview another of Western North Carolina's interesting artists. This morning we're going to be talking with Lee Knight. Lee was raised in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York, interested in folk music while in high school, and during college he became familiar with the music and stories of the Southern Appalachian Mountains, as well as the Adirondacks. So he wanted to learn music and stories from traditional sources, which means people who had them as part of their culture and community for generations. He also collected songs and stories from other parts of the world, including England, Scotland, Central Asia, Colombia, and the Amazon region of Peru. Lee currently works as a folk singer, storyteller, and outdoor leader, performing at concerts, workshops, elder hostels, festivals, camps, and schools. He leads hikes, canoe trips, and guides whitewater rafts. He plays various instruments, including the 5-string banjo, various guitars, the Appalachian dulcimer, the mouth bow, the Cherokee flute, and the Cherokee rattle, as well as Native American drum. Recently, Lee's released a CD from the Appalachians, currently working on a new CD, and a book of Adirondack ballads and folk songs as recorded by Marjorie Lansing Porter in the 1940s and 50s. He's also done things like doing a voiceover for the documentary video The Nantahala, Land of the Noonday Sun. So Lee is a multi-talented and multi-interesting person, and we're lucky to have him here with us this morning, and we're going to spend a little time talking to Lee and finding out what his passions are and what is some of his history, people he knows, music he's going to sing for us probably. So I just want to welcome Lee to the Culture Hour here in,
Great to be
here
here.
in Silva. It's good to see you, and I look forward to our little talk today.
Me too.
All right. Well, let's get started at the beginning. I mean, some of your earliest influences and passions, and maybe some people that you met along the way early on. What got you interested in, ballad music and Appalachian songs, that kind of thing?
Well, one of my first memories was when I was in high school. I had a friend, Bruce Wilson, and every time I went to visit him, he had this album on, and it was a woman with a guitar singing these old songs. And it was Joan Baez's first album, and I fell in love with it and started listening to her. And then right around that time, we got into the folk boom, and so I would listen a lot to the Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and I enjoyed the Limelighters a lot. They had an edge to them, that a lot of the other groups didn't. And then one day I was sitting in the library at Saranac Lake High School, about the size of this studio, and read in Time magazine about Pete Seeger being indicted by the House Un-American Activities Committee. I knew it was somebody I needed to learn about. And so I started looking about Pete Seeger, and of course he's known as a political activist and a songwriter, but also he played a lot of the old-time music. And one of the things that he did, in addition to other things, is he helped introduce me to the old-time music. And then I went to Wofford College in South Carolina. I was going to be a Methodist minister, of all things. Some things don't work out so well, which is probably just as good. But anyway, I had a friend, Ray McLeese, and he said, Lee, if you're going to sing these old songs, you need to hear them sung right. And he brought me up into the mountains here in North Carolina, and I was just writing an email to our friend Ted Olson, the folklorist up at East Tennessee State. He was asking about Horton Barker, who was one of the first ballad singers that I ever heard. Old unaccompanied songs. And I remember the first time I saw him at a festival, he came out on stage. He was blind, old, with a cane. And I'm thinking, boy, I hope he don't take long. And once he started singing, he could have stayed all night. Just had a haunting voice in a wonderful way with the old ballads. And so from there on, it's just been carry a tape recorder around. You never know what you're going to bump into.
Yeah, and I've seen pictures of you with that tape recorder in various parts of the world with recording. I mean, it's kind of like Bascom Lamar Lunsford. I mean, you really have done walk the walk in terms of searching out and recording people in their home places, in their communities.
If that's the best place to listen to it. The old time music, of course, is best done in the living room or the porch. And I knew I was going to like the music. One of the things I wasn't expecting was that how interesting the people were going to be that I met. And a lot of the people, in addition to just their music, they also influenced me in many other ways. You know.
Well, you've got a great picture of you and some of these people you were speaking about on the porch with the dulcimer. This one here.
Oh, okay.
I think.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Okay. Well, here we are up on Beech Mountain, North Carolina, and I'm the one with the fretless banjo. That's a young 22, 23-year-old Lee. In the middle is Frank Prophet Jr. His father was, oddly enough, Frank Prophet Sr. And he was the source of the ballad Tom Dooley. It was collected by Ann and Frank Warner from him back in 1938. The one the Kingston Trio sang had been recorded earlier. And then the other person pretending to play the dulcimer is Ray Hicks. Ray was a well-known storyteller up on Beech Mountain, and we're actually on the porch of his house, just having a great old time.
Well, that's a great shot there. That's classic, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're at Walford, and then you're out in the countryside with your tape recorder, and then what happens next? I mean.
Well, when I graduated from Wofford, my advisor said, "Lee, we need white teachers in the black schools. Are you interested in doing that?" And I said, "How soon can I get there?" And I taught for 6 years in Sumter, South Carolina, 4 years in black schools, lived in the black community all 6 years, 2 years in the desegregated schools. And then from there, the South Carolina Arts Commission hired me as a folk singer. And then the North Carolina Arts Council hired me as a folk singer, which brought me up here. And then from there on, it's just been singing. I teach a lot of classes for what we now call Rhodes Scholar, the former Elder Hostel. And just finished my 39th year as a guide on the Nantahala River.
Wow.
It's a great life.
Yeah. And so, tell me, one of the things I'm really interested in terms of your own history is all the travel you've done. And you've done some really pretty exotic traveling and recording of people all over the world. I mean, maybe you could share some of that with us, too.
I'd be glad to. When I was growing up, my parents subscribed to National Geographic, and this will give you an idea how weird I am. As I read them, there were two places I wanted to visit, Antarctica and the Soviet Union. And I got to the Soviet Union. Got close to Antarctica, got really north in the Soviet Union, which was established then. But I took my fretless banjo with me on the trip to the Soviet Union. And I wanted to go to Lake Baikal, largest freshwater lake in the world. And they didn't have any trips there, and they said you could go on your own with a tour guide. And I said, well, I better not do that. I don't speak the language very well. So I hopped from tour group to tour group. And then one of the tour groups, we went down into Central Asia and Georgia and Armenia and that area. And when we were in Georgia, the bus broke down. And holding up another picture here, these girls were out working in the field. And they came over and looked at us. And everybody started taking pictures of them. And then when they were done, I started walking out toward them, and when they saw me coming, they turned and ran. It's an effect I've had in women all my life. So I got on the bus and got my fretless banjo out. I brought my fretless banjo with me and sat by the roadside and played songs, and they came over and stared at me. And then I asked them if one of them would sing me a song, and sure enough, one of them did. It's this young woman here who's holding the microphone. And she sang me a wonderful song. Et kusi la se la te la ton la me la mien. Hava maybe samsa maybe don la kisha men. Oi oi et van lebe oi oi samsa maybe don la kisha men. Oi oi et van lebe oi oi samsa maybe don la kisha men. And we later got into a town, and I asked a woman there to translate the song for me. She says, it goes, I met you, I fell in love with you, I love your brown eyes, I love your eyebrows.
Your eyebrows. Keep it simple.
And the fun thing about that was in the picture you can see the tape recorder, and they had never seen a tape recorder before. And she knew I was recording her, but what I did afterward is it was a cassette. That's how far back we're going. It was a cassette, so I rewound it and played it for her, and you should have seen their eyes when her voice came out of this little box.
Wow.
Oh. They were quite excited about it. So that was
probably thought of you as a shaman or something.
Yeah.
White man bring magic box.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun.
So that's in Georgia and the Soviet Union, and then what other trips have you made?
Well, I made, as we've already established, I love the old English-Scottish ballads, and so I went to Scotland on 2 occasions for a month each time. Once with Charles Joyner and a group of students from a college in eastern North Carolina, and the second time on my own, and visited with ballad singers throughout Scotland. And the ones I visited with were mostly traveling people, gypsies. They prefer traveling people, and they were the ones that were carrying on the ballad tradition, and so I met up with several of them, and just had a wonderful time. I don't know, did we pull a picture of Lucy? No, we didn't. But that's where I really got into the ballads, and again, that's some really fascinating people. Lizzie Higgins, Lucy Stewart, Elizabeth Stewart.
And then you also got to see Scotland at the same time, which is an extra bonus.
Well, all my trips are sponsored by the Lee Knight Folk Foundation, an unintentional nonprofit. So I went in the wintertime when it was cheap.
Well, that's true, but it's also cold in northern Scotland in the wintertime.
Well, again, I was raised in the Adirondacks, so
Well,
there you go. I still enjoyed the cold. Yeah.
So you probably didn't mind this big blizzard we just had here in the mountains.
It was disappointing, only 3 inches.
Yeah, well, we made it through. So, well, play us something.
Yeah, well, let me share you. This is my favorite instrument. Isn't this beautiful?
Yeah, it is.
This is a homemade fretless banjo. The banjo comes to us from Africa, and came up here in the mountains during slavery time, and the mountain people fell in love with it. And of course, in those days, you couldn't go to a music store. If you wanted an instrument, you had to make it yourself. And this was made by Clifford Glenn. Clifford was a 4th-generation instrument maker up in Watauga County, up around Boone. His great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father was Leonard Glenn, who's in the 3rd Foxfire book, if anyone remembers those books. Then Clifford made this back for me in 1998. It's made out of black walnut.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. The head is made out of goat skin. Clifford liked to use goat skin because it's more resistant to humidity. But in the early days here in the mountains, they'd use about any animal they could find. Groundhog, cat, squirrel, deer. And then on the inside, you can't see it, but the head is stretched out over a piece of tin stovepipe. And the diameter of the stovepipe determines the diameter of the head. And here in the mountains, we call this a mountain banjo or a slick neck banjo, or because it has no frets on it, in times of stress, we call it a fretless banjo.
Right. Play us something.
It's one of my jokes that never works. Here's one of my favorites. Actually, if you pushed me up against the wall and said, Lee, sing me your favorite Appalachian song, this is probably the one I would do. I learned this from Frank Prophet Jr. And this is a family song. It came from, well, Frank learned it from his father, Frank Sr. Frank Sr. learned it from his Aunt Nancy Prather, and Aunt Nancy Prather learned it from the man who's involved. It's the story of a young man going across the mountains from Watauga County, North Carolina, into East Tennessee to join a regiment of the Union Army. A lot of the mountain men fought for the Union. One of the big reasons is, as you know, one of the mountain traits is family loyalty. Civil War is less than 100 years after the American Revolution. A lot of families thought, well, if my grandfather fought to create this country, I'm going to fight to keep it together. So this is a young man going across the mountains to give old Jeff's men, Jefferson Davis's men, a little of his rifle ball, and he's saying goodbye to his family. I'm going across the mountains, oh fare thee well. Going across the mountains, you can hear my banjo tell. Got my rations on my back, my powder it is dry. Going across the mountains, Chrissy, don't you cry. Expect you miss me when I'm gone, but I'm a-going through. When this fighting's over, I'll come home to you. Going across the mountains, if I have to crawl. Give old Jeff's men just a little my rifle ball. Babe, before it's good daylight, if nothing happens to me, I'll be away down yonder in old Tennessee. I'm going across the mountains, so fare thee well. Going across the mountains, you can hear my banjo tell. Going across the mountains, so fare thee well. Going across the mountains, oh, fare thee well.
Yeah.
That's a lovely sounding banjo.
I was just going to say it's a sweet sounding banjo.
I love this. This is my prized possession.
Oh yeah.
Sadly, Clifford died about 2 years ago, and he was the end of the line.
So nobody's making that particular.
Not in his
style?
family anymore. There's a lot of people that make them, more interpreters.
Right.
Not many traditional left.
Right. Well, tell us. There's a picture sitting here in front of us about some of your escapades and interesting trips here in the mountains. Who have we
Well,
got
here we are again at Ray Hicks's house, and the tall man is Ray Hicks, and Ray, as you know, is a very well-known storyteller here in the Southern Appalachians. 6 feet 7 inches tall, and he made his living with roots and herbs, and later in his life telling stories. And one of the things about him, he would never go to a festival unless he could get home that night. He always wanted to be home at night. That was one of his conditions. Standing next to him is Frank Warner. Ann and Frank Warner were among the pioneer folk song collectors in North America. They're the ones who collected the Ballad of Tom Dooley from Frank Prophet Sr. back in 1938, right up there at Ray's house. And they also collected, he's got the whole world in his hands out on the Outer Banks here in North Carolina. They also recorded in the Adirondacks and actually throughout the country. And they were, starting in 1938, they were pioneer folk song collectors. One of the stories they would tell, they finally got a recording machine. And you know, back here in the mountains in the 30s and 40s, the roads weren't that good, and a lot of places didn't have electricity. And one of the things they would do, sometimes they would go as far up on the road as they could, and they would hook their portable recording machine, which is made for them by Philco. They would hook it up to the battery, and people would come down and they'd sing songs into the hood of their car.
There you go.
Yeah. So they were doing, Ann and Frank were doing a program at Blue Mountain Lake in the Adirondacks, and I went up afterwards and said, you know, I really love these old songs. I'd like to learn more about them, and they invited me to their home. Frank was born and raised here in North Carolina, but they were living up on Long Island. He was an executive with the YMCA, and she was an executive secretary for a political person up there. And they said, come on down. And I went to their house, actually wound up going down on several occasions, and they let me listen to their recordings, and I could write notes, and when I had questions, I'd go in and ask them questions, and it was a wonderful way to learn things. And we became good friends, did a number of programs together, and we had 2 reunions actually up at Ray's house, where people who'd been recording with him since 1938, they'd all get together, and we'd have, there were some people who would only sing religious music. They didn't want to do any secular music, so we sang spirituals and things in the morning, had lunch, and after lunch was over, those people would leave, and we'd start singing the more raucous kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a rural version of what I experienced in San Francisco, what we refer to as the University of the Streets.
Yeah.
Where you're hanging out with poets, I mean, of much acclaim, and in the cafes and in the bars at night, you know, in different places, and getting it, you know, one-on-one that way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get any better than that. And you're doing the same thing here out in, visiting people out in their homes in Appalachia and different places, Long Island, for instance, but that's the best way to learn, I think.
Oh, here's another story. Frank Prophet Jr. became a good friend of mine. What happened, I wrote to Frank Prophet Sr. He's still my favorite Appalachian singer. He had a nice baritone voice. He played the fretless banjo and the dulcimer. And Frank Jr. wrote back and said, my dad has passed on, but I'm carrying on the tradition, and I would love to meet you. So I went up, and we established a very good friendship that lasted until Frank Jr. died a few years ago. And so one of the times he said, let's go over to Ray's house. His mother was Ray's sister. They're all together. So we went over, and there were people there playing music, and Ray was telling stories, and I didn't know anything about stories. I was into songs at that point, and it was just... And every time Ray would start telling a story, my tape recorder is on the wood stove in the house, because it was summertime, the stove wasn't on, and so I could record everything. And every time he started telling a story, I'm thinking, boy, I hope you don't tinkle. He's using up all my tape. Collected some of the best Jack Tales you'd ever want to hear. And Ray was a fascinating Jack Tales teller, and as you know, I learned to appreciate them and learn more about them. And he was so natural. Just had a natural. He'd just sit back and talk and talk. And his tales would sometimes take 20 minutes, an hour, half an hour. I mean, you know,
Wow.
they were, but you just got entranced with him. He just brought you into these places. His specialty, or the ones he was best known for, were the Jack Tales, but he had all kinds of stories.
Well, you must have an amazing archive by this
Oh.
time. Maybe, you know, audio, but also written. And I'm wondering, you know, is there anything you're thinking about doing with all this archival material?
Well, all of my Appalachian stuff has already been deposited at Berea College, at the library in Berea. And one of the things I mentioned to Ted Olson when I was emailing him this morning is that I need to get it digitalized. That's the next thing to do. And all the Adirondack material is going to go to a place called Traditional Arts in New York, upstate New York. And I think the Scottish material is probably also going to wind up at Berea at some point. I'm not sure. But when I finish this Adirondack book, taking care of all this stuff is plus, like you, I'm a book freak.
Yeah.
And I have songbooks. I have paths going through my apartment. Yeah. Between the books and the instruments and the recordings, there's not a whole lot of room for people.
It's kind of like a gauntlet going.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also a lot of your material has also been recorded. So here's one of Lee's CDs of Adirondack songs that we've been talking about.
Let me tell you a little bit about this CD.
Yeah.
This is Adirondack Folk Songs. I met and worked with a wonderful woman, Marjorie Lansing Porter, and she began recording the Adirondack songs in 1940. I met her in 1970, and we worked together editing and working with her collection until she died in 1974. And I'm just finishing up that. University of Tennessee Press has accepted the book, and hopefully it's going out by the end of the year. Certainly by spring. So I made this recording, and it's made from her collection. And do you know the market for unaccompanied Adirondack lumber camp and iron mining songs?
No, I can't say
I sell 2 or 3 of those CDs every single year. But one of the things I'm proud of is somebody gave a copy of it to Pete Seeger, and he sent me a note saying how much he enjoyed it.
Oh, now that's real.
He also did a recording from her collection for Folkways. It's called Champlain Valley Songs.
Well, that had to feel good.
Oh, it's framed in the living room.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a postcard from Lawrence Ferlinghetti framed in my house. So I know how that is.
Yeah, exactly.
But you've got a great picture here of Pete on the boat there.
So if I remember right, this is 1969, and this is the first year the Clearwater came out. The Clearwater was a boat that Pete was a big spearhead behind. The purpose of the boat was, the Hudson River was thoroughly polluted. The fish were unedible, most of it was unswimmable, the water undrinkable unless you did a lot of work with it. And so Pete and some of his friends got together and they made this boat called the Clearwater, which is still sailing up and down the Hudson. And the purpose of it is to educate people to how dirty the river is, how beautiful the valley is. The Hudson River Valley is a beautiful place. And they've been instrumental in making a lot of changes and cleaning up the Hudson. It's better than it was. So this is a picture of the first crew of the Clearwater. Back in 1969, I took this. I was at the Newport Folk Festival, and Pete is the one playing the banjo there. Some of people may remember Don McLean, the American Pie guy. He's sitting on the deck there. He's the one in the blue shirt down by the railing. Jimmy Collier is the black man who was a very fine singer. He's in there as well. Gordon Bach, who many people up in New England know is a wonderful singer and songwriter. He's in there too. So that was the first crew of the Clearwater. And the next year I got to crew on the Clearwater. I did some volunteer work the first year up and down the Hudson. And one of my favorite memories is Pete Seeger sharing with me some of the just recently discovered alternative versions of This Land Is Your Land that Woody Guthrie had written, but had not been published up until that point.
Yeah, so you go to these places and you're really mining for gold, and a lot of it comes totally unexpected, and
Yeah.
you know, it's really it's special stuff.
Yeah.
This is the more of it's an Appalachian CD. I mean, we saw the Adirondack Ballads and Folk Songs CD, and this one is called An Untraditional Journey, and you can see it's a little different.
Actually, that's a collection of songs from around the world. There are songs from the Appalachians, from the Adirondacks, from Central Asia, Scotland, Mississippi Delta, South Carolina Sea Islands. And I have some of the voices of the people that I learned them from are on there introducing the songs in some cases. That was really fun to put together. I did the same with the Adirondack one too. I used some of the voices of the people Mrs. Porter collected from, so people could hear their voices.
Right. No, I've listened to both of those, and I think that really adds a real extra dimension to the, not the whole album only, but to each individual recording
Yeah.
song. So it makes it more authentic and unique, and it kind of puts you there in that place. You know.
Yeah.
So. Well, quite a life. I mean, it's been really a full life. And what are you doing now, in particular, besides putting together the book on the Adirondacks?
Well, I still teach a lot of the Rhodes Scholar programs. I do some over at Lake Junaluska. I do a lot of Cherokee programs. I teach some classes with the programs they do in Asheville. We do a wonderful program that combines Appalachian history and culture with trains out of Chattanooga, and I teach on that one. As I mentioned earlier, I just finished my 39th year as a guide on the Nantahala. I'm going to go for 40 next summer.
Are you going to do it?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I love the river. I love that gorge.
Yeah.
And I still do folk song concerts.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically finished up my season. My season usually starts in March with the guiding and some of the Rhodes Scholar things and concerts and stuff, and it runs through December.
Yeah. Well, so you're staying busy then.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
You know. Well, play us something on that 12-string of yours. That's a beautiful sounding instrument. We were listening to it earlier. Just pick something you like and...
Let's go down to Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
We're going to go to the home of W.A. Furry Lewis. Furry was one of the early bluesmen. He recorded back in the 20s and 30s, and then he disappeared. Well, he didn't really disappear. He knew where he was. But the Depression came in, and there wasn't demand for recording, and he worked as a street cleaner in Memphis. And then when the folk boom came in the 60s, he was rediscovered, as they say. Again, he knew where he was. And he did some recordings. The Rolling Stones loved him. He did some concerts with the Rolling Stones. He was in a movie with Burt Reynolds, W.W. and the Dixie Dance Kings. Joni Mitchell wrote a song about him. He sang the old blues. So we're sitting in Furry Lewis's home in Memphis, Tennessee. It's a kind of a shotgun house in a dusty yard with a dusty road. Furry lost a leg trying to hop a train going up to record in the 30s. And so he's sitting up on his bed. His artificial leg is standing in the corner. His woman is there taking care of stuff. Some of the neighbors have come in. They knew Furry was going to be doing some songs. Mr. Daniels is there, Jack to some of you. There's an earnest young white boy who wants to learn the blues. Furry looks up at me and he says, "You want to hear Casey Jones?" And I said, "Yes, sir." Woke up this morning, 'twas 4 o'clock. Casey told the fireman, "Get your boiler hot. Put on your water, put on your coal. Put your head out the window, see my driver roll, see my driver roll. Put your head out the window, see my driver roll." Lord, some people said Casey's running over time, having a collision with a 109. Mr. Casey says, well, this ain't in mine. I can't make my jury unless I make my time. Told all the pastors, better keep yourself hid. You know we're gonna shake it like Cheney did, like old Cheney did. Gonna keep it shaking like old Cheney did. Well, I sold my gin and I sold it straight. The police run me to my woman's gate. She come to the door and she nodded her head. Lord, she made me welcome to the folding bed, to that folding bed. Lord, she made me welcome to the folding bed. Casey told the fireman before I go, there's 2 more roads that I'm wanting to ride. The fireman says, which roads is she? The Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe, oh the Santa Fe. The Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe. Forget this verse. Woke up this morning about 10 o'clock. Faces fireman in the doorstop shop. Days all eyes, kids ace grind just to beat the band. Sitting by the window cause their father's gone on the road again. Lord, their father's gone on the road again. Casey dove. Mother told the children, don't you hold your breath. We'll get another pension from your father's death, from your father's death. We'll get another pension from your father's death. Gonna leave Memphis, gonna spread the news. Memphis women don't wear no shoes. I got a sign on the back of my shirt says a natural born Eastman. I don't gotta work, I don't gotta work. A natural born Eastman, I don't gotta work. So what you've got there is a field recording. A lot of times when I'd be recording people, they'd forget words and have to stop and back up and go over them again. So for some reason, verses were popping out of my head. Some days I don't have such good brain days.
That's right. Well, it makes it more authentic.
But it's very authentic. But one of the fascinating things, Furry probably recorded that song a half dozen times for different companies. It was one of his favorites, and not one of them's the same.
It's kind of like the jazz tradition. It's never the same twice. You know?
That's right, yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
But that is a nice sounding guitar.
Oh, it's got a beautiful vibrato or whatever you would want to call it. Yeah. So you've been on the road a lot. I mean, that's a perfect song for your life in a lot of ways. You've been on the road for most of your life in different ways. So where are you now, and how did you get to where your home base is now?
Well, I live in Crowe, and just down the road from you.
It is.
And well, the North Carolina Arts Council hired me as a to work in their. They had an arts in the college, arts in the schools thing, and, visiting artist program. That's what that one was called, Arts in Schools of South Carolina. And what happened was you would go to a community college and you could stay there for a year or two. And so I got hired at Tri-County Community College out in Murphy. And so I worked there for 2 years. And after 2 years you had to move on to another school. And after my 2 years, the only schools available were in the Piedmont. I don't do Piedmont. So I quit the program and went to work for WKRK in Murphy, North Carolina as a DJ.
Really? Oh.
And I worked as a DJ for a year, and then I was hired on staff at a camp and conference center up in Highlands, and then all sorts of things have happened, and eventually my life evolved into this one here where I live in Crowe and work all over the place, wherever it leads to.
Does Crowe feel like home to you?
It does. I love it there. Yeah, I have a small studio apartment, which I say is just jammed with stuff. But I was just sitting there this morning with morning coffee, looking at the walls. And, there's wonderful photographs of all this stuff, and there's my bookcases with all my books and the CD cases and boxes stacked up because I'm redoing the CDs and the instruments and getting ready to come over here. And it doesn't get any better than this.
So you got a little time this winter to kind of lay back and relax and at least stay home more.
Yeah. Normally I travel some in the winter. I'm still hoping I'll get up to the Adirondacks. I like to go up to the Adirondacks every winter in snowshoes on. Having some car difficulty right now, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull that off. But and I was hoping to go to Nova Scotia, but again with the car problems, I'm not going to do that this year. But normally I do 1 or 2 trips in the wintertime.
Okay.
And but this year I think I'm going to pretty much stay close to home.
So, I mean, we've got several of your instruments here in the studio with us, and over the years and your travels and meeting different people and different kinds of cultures, different kind of traditions, you run into some pretty interesting instruments.
Oh gosh,
and,
yeah.
I'm looking at one right now over there that looks like a bow and arrow, but I don't think that's why you brought it.
No, it's this may be the second oldest instrument in the world.
Really?
The oldest would be the human voice, but this comes to us from Africa. And I'm not a musicologist, I'm not trained, but my thinking is that one day some guys were sitting around a campfire, and the oldest places we know about now so far are Africa. So it could have been 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, and discovered they could get some music out of their bow. And so this instrument also came to us from Africa. When it came here to the southern Appalachians, it was played by the red culture, the white culture, and the black culture. It's called a mouth bow, M-O-U-T-H, mouth bow. This one's made out of sourwood. Those of us who live in the mountains love sourwood for many reasons.
That's right.
And this is how it works.
Amazing. That's simply amazing. I've never seen that instrument or heard it played before, and that's really amazing.
Well, the first time I ever heard it was there used to be an old-time string band over in Hiwassee, Georgia. The Eller brothers and Ross Brown played fiddle with them a lot. And Vaughn Eller played the mouth bow. It was the first time I'd ever heard it. It became famous during the folk boom. Buffy St. Marie plays one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I've heard it in 1 or 2 other places, but it's not something you find. It's pretty much a one-trick pony. But one of the stories I like to tell is I discovered how you get to Carnegie Hall. You learn how to play the mouth bow. I'm a member of a world music group called Woolman and Friends. We were a quartet, we're now a trio. And one of the places we played was Carnegie Hall, and one of the instruments I play with Woman and Friends is the mouthball.
I bet there's not a lot of people that played the mouthball at Carnegie Hall.
Although that history of Carnegie Hall is so fascinating that, when you play Carnegie Hall, you know you're going to be there a couple of years ahead of time. Their schedules are planned so far in advance, and so I knew I was going to play there, and I didn't want to get stage fright. That's a big deal for a little old country boy. And so I studied the history. That's what I do if I have to set my mind in a certain place. And I walked through a door Tchaikovsky walked through.
There you go.
Isaac Stern and Pete Seeger, and almost any musician you can think of from the great musician from the beginnings of the hall.
Right.
And we rehearsed in what's now a small performing center that Bob Dylan's first New York concert was in, and all that history.
Yeah.
And it's just a fascinating experience.
Just soak it up in those places, especially if you know about it. Then you can really open up your pores and let it let it in, because you don't get those kind of experiences every day. So
No. One and only, I think, for me.
Yeah.
I don't expect that I'll ever get back there again. But Woman is a woman from China, capital W, capital M-A-N, and she's a friend of the Kronos Quartet. And she wanted to do a recording of stringed instruments from around the world, so she put together this quartet. She was from China, James Makubia from Uganda, a man from Ukraine, and me from here. And we made a recording called Woman and Friends, and we played Carnegie Hall 2 years ago. We did a 2-week tour of China.
Wow.
We've played up in Canada and throughout the United States. And we play once or twice a year. It's kind of slowed down now. She's spending more of her time in China. She's a member of Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble.
Oh, is that all? Yeah.
That's all, yeah. Yeah, I sit beside her and wonder, what am I doing here?
Well, you did mention the Kronos Quartet, and I know you're friends with that group and do some concerts with them. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've loved the Kronos' music for a long time. The fascinating string quartet, and they have taken the string quartet to places people never thought it would go to, and they're still doing it.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to meet them, and we hit it on. David Harrington and John Sherva, especially, the two violinists with the group, so the next thing that I'll do around them, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be doing, but they have a festival every spring in San Francisco, their old stomping grounds, and they've invited me to come out to help celebrate Pete Seeger's 100th birthday.
All right.
So I don't know quite what I'll do there, but something around Pete for sure.
Yeah, no, take that mouth bow with you. You never
know. Yeah, one of the few instruments I never heard Pete play, but.
Yeah. I see you've got another banjo over there. Tell us a little bit about this one and make it play something.
Yeah, these instruments are, with the exception of the guitar, were all handmade. I've told you about my banjo. I have a dulcimer. I didn't bring it in, but I have a dulcimer that's also made by Clifford. And then this banjo is made by Lo Gordon, who lives over in Brevard. I was born in East Virginia, North Carolina, I did go. There I spied a fair, pretty maiden, her age and name I did not know. Well, her hair was dark in color, and her cheeks a ruby red. gate, I would rise up to meet you. For you're the girl I do adore. I'd rather be in some dark holler where the sun refused to shine than to be with another man's darling and know your love will never be mine. I don't want your gold back dollar, and I don't want your watch and chain. All I want is your love, darling. Say you'll take me back again.
Banjo's got a great sound too.
Yeah.
What is the finger picking style that you're using? No, I mean, there's lots of them, I know, but I don't know anything about them. So.
No, I get asked that question all the time. Banjo players look at me and say, "What in the world is he doing?" So here's the story.
Okay.
As I said, I was raised in the Adirondacks, and I got interested in the banjo. My favorite member of the Kingston Trio was a banjo player, and then I'm getting into Pete Seeger, and this is the 60s. I think I got my first banjo in like 1961, 62, something like that. And there were no banjo players in the Adirondacks then. So I got a book and I learned how to play the chords with the left hand, but I couldn't figure out the right hand. And so I just developed my own style. So I call it the Adirondack style.
Okay.
But actually...
it's not the Lee Knight style, it's the Adirondack style.
We'll call it the Adirondack style, but I'm the only one who plays it, yeah. And I've tried to show it to people, and it's just hard for me to slow it down and do what I'm doing. But, I was on a program with David Holt one time, and he said, "Lee, that's some right hand you got there."
That's a good story, too.
Yeah.
We all know David Holt. He's a local hero of many people in these mountains. So how many songs do you think that you know at this point? I mean,
yeah, I couldn't begin to guess. And know at this point, as I'm getting older, some of them are fading away in terms of memorizing the lyrics. But with notes and my notebooks and everything, they're in the hundreds. Yeah. So all those ballads from Scotland and the Adirondack songs, because I've been working on this book for years and listening to her recordings and all the songs I've recorded here in the Appalachians. And Frank Prophet Jr. and I, we got together lots of times. He was a very dear friend, and probably got the whole Prophet repertoire at some point.
Yeah.
And then probably a half dozen songs from down in the Mississippi Delta with Frey Lewis, and some wonderful shouts or spirituals from the Sea Islands, South Carolina.
So got some blues mixed in there too, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. It reminds me, what you're talking about now, and all your experiences and the long Scottish ballads and everything. It reminded me of an experience I had on the west coast in County Mayo of Ireland, and sitting in a pub after a funeral. And it went on all night long, and people are drinking their Guinness and whatever it was they were drinking, and singing songs a cappella, and reciting Robert Service poems that went on for hours. I mean, Robert Service, I mean, it's like, you know, one of these 100-verse songs or poems, and these people that, you know, they may have learned it in the 5th grade or something,
Yeah.
and they still can do it. You know, it's amazing. Maybe they have to be a little tipsy to remember it, but boy, it was some experience for me to see that. You know, 'cause the poets and the balladeers, the songwriters are still revered in the Celtic countries. I mean,
Yeah.
you go over there and you've got people all over you, you know, wanting to know about you and what you're doing, and curious, and actually buying books and CDs. So, you know, it was an eye-opener for me to get over in that part of the world.
Oh. Yeah, Elsie Johnson on the Orkney, she sang, one of the songs she sang for us was, it takes 25 minutes to sing.
Wow.
Yeah, I've only sung it once with the words in front of me.
Yeah.
Down in Millatifty there lived a maid by the name of Annie, the do-do-do-do-do-do, on and on for 25 minutes. Yeah, Millatifty's Annie, yeah.
Well, tell us a story about your experiences out and about, and something that really just, you know, pops into your mind as being, you know, kind of seminal to the story of your life and people you've met, and
Actually, yeah, I'd like to talk about this man here. This is Lawrence Older, O-L-D-E-R. As I mentioned to you earlier, I got interested in the old folk songs in college, and I wanted to go out and record them, and I thought the best place to start would be my native Adirondacks. And so Lawrence had made a recording for Folk Legacy, a really fine recording company that sang really traditional singers. He played at Newport and other festivals and things. And so I wrote him a letter, said I'd like to learn more about the Adirondack songs. And he said, come on down. And he and his wife lived in near Saratoga, Middle Grove, New York. And I'm nervous. I'm kind of shy about meeting people. I can do a concert a lot easier than I can do a party. And so I'm nervous about meeting him. He's done this recording, and he's, you know, and they made me very comfortable. And my first visit lasted for 6 hours.
wow.
And we went on to become very good friends. I'm a recovering alcoholic. He's the first one I talked to about my problem and trying to get over it. He went to both my weddings. Didn't show up for either divorce, but I didn't go to the second one myself. But we played on programs together. We visited each other's homes. He played the fiddle and sang the old Adirondack folk songs. And he's the one who got me started. And he told me about Marjorie Lansing Porter, and said, you know, you need to go meet her. And I just have miles and miles of tape of him singing and us singing together. It was really fun. He liked to have somebody accompany him when he played the fiddle, so I usually played the banjo. And then there was one session, and another Adirondack fiddler came by to visit Lawrence, Vic Kibler. And that session was, oh gosh, the music is, Vic Kibler was just a fascinating fiddler, and just a great session. So Lawrence was very important to me, and I have a picture in my house. I didn't bring it because it's really kind of dark, but it's signed to my son in folk music.
There you go. Is that one framed too?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's up near Pete's postcard. Yeah, let me do a song that I learned from
Please,
Lawrence Older.
please.
This will continue the story. Sadly, Lawrence got cancer, and all of us have experienced probably people having to fight cancer. And he fought it for a year, and he passed away. And the day he died, his wife Martha called to let me know that Lawrence had passed on, and I was feeling really sad and all. And but later on, I was invited to sing at his funeral, and this is the song I sang at his funeral. And then when Frank Warner died, who we talked about before, they had a memorial concert for him in New York City. Alan Lomax was the MC, and Pete was on it, and Gene Ritchie, and a lot of really neat people. And I was the Adirondack representative.
Cool.
And I sang this same song. So I call it my funeral song. And I have a friend who's an Adirondack singer, and I've said to him, when you hear that I've passed away, go out in the woods and sing this song in my honor sometime. But it's not a funereal song. It's actually a pretty peppy song.
Right.
But this is from the Adirondacks, from Lawrence Older. Ye hardy sons of freedom who around the mountains range, come gather round you lumber boys and listen to my song. On the banks of the sweet Saranac where the limpid waters flow, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Once more a-lumbrin' go, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. To the music of our axes we'll make the woods resound, and many a tall and lofty pine come tumbling to the ground. At night around our good campfire we'll sing while cold winds blow, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Once more a-lumbrin' go, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. You may talk about your parties and your plays. Well, pity us, poor lumber boy, go jouncing on our sleighs. But we ask no better pastime than to hunt the buck and doe, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Once more a-lumbrin' go, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Now when winter it is over and the housebound streams are free, we'll hoist our logs to Glens Falls and we'll haste our girls to sea. With plenty to eat and plenty to drink, back to the woods we'll go, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Once more a-lumbrin' go, and we'll range the wildwoods over and once more a-lumbrin' go. Love that song.
Yeah, that makes a funeral into a party almost.
That's one of the songs from the Adirondack CD. I don't understand why it doesn't sell more. But Lawrence Older was a major influence. Very sharing, very giving, very caring. And what a wonderful way to start. And it gave me the courage to keep it up.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did, and I think we all are. We've been talking a lot about some of the older artists, many of whom have passed on.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the young artists? Have you run into any young artists who you're interested in or think might have a future in the tradition we're talking about?
I haven't really bumped into many. I'm afraid I'm kind of narrow. When it comes to the traditional music, I like listening to the old singers. Mm-hmm. And I'm really not interested in listening to singers like me. When I play these things, I'm pulling out the old field recordings or the old Folkways records or some of those wonderful things. But of course, we have one treasure here in the Appalachians, Sheila K. Adams, who I think is the finest ballad singer we have living today. She's just a wonderful singer. She's better known for her storytelling, but
right.
She plays a really fine banjo, and I love the old ballads that she sings. And
I've done a couple elder hostel gigs with her. That's been a while, but I know who she is.
Yeah. I love all her work, but because of my love of the ballads.
I just wondered if there were any young people that you knew of that would be carrying on the tradition. I mean, in the sense.
I don't, but I live sort of a limited life in those kind of ways, and I don't go to festivals very much. I've been in a living room. I don't need to stand with 5,000 people. And when it comes to the traditional music, I do tend to be kind of narrow. Other kinds of music, I listen to all kinds. I love a lot of rock and the early rock and jazz. And my dad listened to Dixieland. I got interested in that. And of course, classical music. I love chamber music a lot. Mm-hmm. So I listen to a lot of different things. But in terms of actually, as I was saying that, it just struck me. One of the things that Pete said one time, somebody asked him about another singer, and he said, well, you know, I've listened to so much and so many, and I'm so narrow that when people ask me about that, I won't answer the question.
Fair enough.
He has his own boundaries, and his own, what's good to him may not be good to another, and vice versa. And he didn't want to be passing judgment on people.
Right.
But I don't have any to pass judgment on, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of awkward too. I mean, people ask you, well, who's your favorite poet? Well, come on. Most poets worth any salt at all have more than one favorite poet.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So, and to name that person is ignoring everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's one of those situations.
Yeah.
Well,
sadly, one of the things that happens as I get older is that all these people have passed away. And, so finding a home for the materials that I have, although I don't really have anything unique, all this stuff has been collected by professional folklorists and places, and it's all archived and everything, but it's still a fairly unique collection. We haven't talked about the Indians at all, but I've got some things from the Adirondacks and people you were raised with, the Cherokee, just fascinating people.
Yeah, well, maybe that's another program. We
Yeah.
can come and you can bring your flutes and drums, and we can do an all Indian program.
Yeah. Okay.
But well, Lee, it's been fascinating, and we could go on for hours. I'm convinced of that. And
Well, we do when we're not filming, right?
we do. And so we'll have to have you come back, and we'll make this a as continued program. So. To all of you out there in the audience, thank you for being with us here this morning on the Culture Hour here in the woods, these beautiful green woods that we're sitting in the middle of here. And invite you to come back next time when we'll have an interesting and profound artist from our region here to talk with you and to share his life and her life and all the stories and talents that go along with that. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.